Welcome to a Creative Approach podcast. I'm your host, Karen Poirier-Brody. Well, folks, it's a difficult time here in California. I think everyone knows how devastating the fires have been in this state. There's been a tragic loss of life and property, and the impact is falling wider than just the immediate area of the fires. The smoke is steadily making its way over to the ocean, but along the way, it's affecting the health of many. Here at my house, we've been stuck indoors with the HEPA filters running. Outside, we need a respirator mask labeled like N95 or N100. Last night, my husband and I were going a bit stir-crazy, and I think my son was too, so we stopped by and picked him up and went out to dinner, and I was wearing my mask. Now, not all health experts recommend the use of these masks because they do make it difficult to get air through them. And so for people with heart conditions or respiratory problems, they probably could affect oxygen levels. And they certainly can't be used except for a limited period of time. But I think they can be helpful. Although maybe I shouldn't have gone out because I noticed today as I'm recording this that my voice is a little bit raspy. But I think that we're going to have more health conditions than just raspy throats. Unfortunately, there are so many people here who are homeless, and we're hoping for rain, but that's going to certainly impact people who are living outdoors in less than ideal conditions. In fact, I think there have been outbreaks of norovirus among people cramped together in these less than ideal conditions. And of course, we have the potential for mudslides, particularly in Southern California. So please, folks, if you're able to give a charitable donation in this coming holiday season, consider the Red Cross or some of the certified California fire charities for your possible holiday donation. Folks here are really going to need it. Here in California, we're aware that this is an urgent problem of global warming and some inadequacy of plans to deal with the problem. For example, putting electrical cables underground, but even if a project like that had started a couple of years ago, that's an enormous project. And who's to say that even in these areas where the fires started, that those cables would have been down under the ground already? And the whole state is a tinderbox. I heard this morning a silly statement that it's not global warming. It's just that a few people didn't do a good job of raking up the leaves in their yards. We don't have nice tidy lawns everywhere like that. And even the big, beautiful trees in our state are very dry and suffering. And those lead to conditions that once a fire is ignited, things spread fast. So I think that we're very aware here that a healthy, sustainable world is a very pressing concern. I believe I mentioned in the last show that I had been in Montreal recently for my medical school reunion, and I had the opportunity to fire my personal interest in sustainability. Maybe fire, spark, words like that are poor choices under the circumstances, but anyways, it indicates my passion. But I attended a lecture by the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Gina McCarthy, and she was a special homecoming guest at McGill. And I was happy to hear that she is hopeful about the future and that she thinks we have the technology to combat global warming. At the current rate, I believe without intervention, the statistics are that we have only 57 harvests and about 12 years before world catastrophe. Unfortunately, here in California, it seems catastrophe is very much now. Once back from that trip, I took a short jaunt over to Oakland for a Green Biz conference. It seemed to naturally follow the trip to Montreal in theme, I think. When it comes to sustainability, I'm always interested in what industry is working on, especially now that the federal administration is in denial about the seriousness of the problem. I think we need to look to business. I think eventually, at some point, the government may need to be pulled kicking and screaming into the fray. Businesses may have great ideas, but without regulations, it may not be smart to invest in costly technologies that eat into profits when the margins are small, unless the playing field is even. But I think there's some urgency to do it. Nonetheless, some things make economic sense right now, and those businesses doing. While I was at GreenBiz, I met many leaders of innovative companies. One of these is today's guest. Now, I had met her before and had actually booked her to speak on this program before I even attended the meeting. So I saved my questions for Molly Morse about the details of her current work to this interview. She is one of the bright and innovative people who's bringing new technologies to work for a sustainable planet, and I am intrigued to learn more. Join me now in my conversation with Molly Morse to learn more about her passion for positive impact plastics, the health of the environment, and her creative approach. Hello, welcome to a Creative Approach podcast. My guest today is Molly Morse, and she is a scientist and a business person and has a rather interesting story, I think. So welcome, Molly.
Thank you, Karen.
And maybe that's what we should do, is just get right into it of exactly what it is that you do.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm Molly Morse, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Mango Materials. And Mango Materials has a new vision for the plastics industry to change it from a planetary threat into an environmentally friendly closed loop process. So specifically what Mango Materials does is we take methane gas, can be waste methane gas, feed it to bacteria that naturally produce a biodegradable material. Now, this raw material is what we produce. That's the core of our technology. But what's unique is this material can be a substitute for conventional plastics. So it can go into packaging. It can go into fibers that get made into garments for clothing. So people often don't realize a lot of our clothes are made out of plastic.
Right.
And our material is alternative. Yeah. And not only that, there's a huge problem end of life with these materials. So ours are biodegradable. We don't have that same challenge.
And also, if it's not just that they can deteriorate, right? It's that if we ingest them in our food or our fish or stuff, ingest them, we have the means to metabolize these things, right?
Exactly. And that's a really important part that people don't realize. Just because something breaks down doesn't necessarily mean it's okay. It might fragmentize into lots of little bits that are microscopic, and it could still be floating around the ocean. So yes, it's very important that material can be consumed and enter part of our natural ecosystem.
Right. And then you're using up methane. So I assume some of this would metabolize back in methane, but you're not really adding anything, because some of it will turn into other things like CO2 and stuff too, which is another gas. But I mean, that's normal. We breathe that out when we breathe in oxygen.
Exactly. So we're advocates for the natural occurring carbon cycle. So we say our material is a resource. It's just like a food. If you eat a banana, you'll use some of that, could be released in your body as heat. Some of that banana could be used for energy. Some of that your body respires CO2. That's the same thing with the biopolymer we produce. So when it's biodegraded, and by the way, we don't advocate for the natural ecosystems to be the disposal ground for materials under any situation, but there's a lot of materials that accidentally end up there. And if they do, we want them to be part of the natural carbon cycle. So if you have bacteria or fungi, microorganisms could eat the carbon in this material, then they use some of that to reproduce. Some of it's released as heat. Some of it will go into cell mass. And yes, some of it will be respired. If it's in an environment where oxygen is present, generally CO2 is released. If no oxygen is present, generally methane is released. But that's how living things on planet Earth work.
Exactly. And basically, you said you can be used in fabrics as a fiber. And it would have some of the same properties as plastic then? Or these?
Yeah, so the plastic, or what most people are familiar with, is polyester. So that the dress I'm wearing right now is made out of polyester. Our athletic apparel is largely polyester. I think it's something like 60% of all apparel is made out of polyester, other plastics, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And the type of material we produce is technically a biopolyester, but it doesn't have the same end-of-life concerns.
Right.
And so similar to conventional polyester, you can adjust the fiber properties to be something like a fleece or something like a silky dress. Oh. So we produce the raw material that goes into that. It's actually the yarn manufacturers who can tweak the characteristics.
And it can also be used like to make things that like we use plastics for now, bottles and
Yeah, we're doing
containers.
some work with cosmetic packaging. So like wide
Uh,
mouth jars and caps is another application we're looking at, and even things like plastic bags.
uh-huh.
Imagine like garbage bags and things like that, which we're seeing bans on some of those, but they are part of modern culture and modern civilization is plastic.
It's
So
hard to do
trying to fix the
without
end of
them.
life syndrome.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this case, if they ended up in a landfill, they would degenerate, right? Up,
Yes, so
up.
if it's a modern landfill that's promoting biodegradation,
Uh-huh.
then methane will be produced. But you hear the stories on the news about the banana peel that's 60 years old. Some landfills were designed more like tombs. And if that's
Yeah.
the case, our material would not break down. It needs lots of enzymes to break
So,
down. It needs,
so we need a
yeah.
very modern now. How prevalent are those? I mean, are communities
Actually
switching?
very prevalent. So
Okay.
like pretty much anything built in the last 20 to 30 years would be like that. So it's just the much older grandfathered in facilities,
Uh-huh.
especially
Sure.
in arid environments that
Oh, right, because
where it
there's no
wouldn't break down.
moisture to
Yeah,
help the organisms,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to explain it because not everybody listening is going to be a scientific background, so we have to kind of get into
Yeah,
these
and it
things.
gets technical quickly.
I
Yeah.
know. And then this stuff, if it got into the ocean, it would biodegrade.
Exactly. That's actually the whole motivation behind our company is we're very passionate about the oceans and protecting them from the threat of persistent plastic. So we don't want to be dumping plastics in the ocean, but there's a lot of materials that accidentally end up there, whether it's derelict fishing debris or other materials accidentally. We want materials that can be consumed naturally by marine microorganisms. So all the work we do is always with that in mind.
Right, because right now we have a terrible problem with plastics getting in there, and they're not going to degenerate for like
Exactly.
forever. And even when they do, they're going to form those little teeny pieces that would be ingested
Exactly.
and become part of
Yeah, very,
fish's
very
bodies and our
bad news.
bodies. Yeah, yeah, bad. It's
Exactly.
very
Yeah.
bad news. Yeah. And how long does this stuff take? I mean, it would still be a problem if it's floating around for quite a while before it degenerates. I mean, how long would this sort of last in the
Yeah,
ocean?
so it needs significant enzymatic attack. So that means let's pretend you have furniture in your backyard and you're located in the Caribbean where it's very moist and there's rain and then there's tropical rainforest and you have backyard furniture out of it. Probably over time, that furniture could start to biodegrade. However, if you're
Uh-huh.
in a more arid region where things, maybe you even put it in your compost pile, but your compost pile you don't really mix and it's not really moist, it's going to take a lot longer.
Uh-huh.
So if we have a fiber of this material that's very thin, you can imagine like a single thread of this, it ends up at the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant's a perfect location. Tons of microorganisms. The temperature's perfect. There's moisture. You're talking days. Same if you have a very thin film of this, single digit
Ah,
days.
so
If
that's
it's a thicker material, imagine your cell phone cover,
uh-huh.
mobile phone cover, and it ends up in the deep Arctic. Well, it's very cold there. Things grow very slow. Even natural organic material would take a very long time. Likewise, our material would take a long time in that environment.
It appears we may not have our Arctic forever, so
this is
oh.
this is true. Um,
Okay. But anyway,
but
so
there's tests you can do, and our material passed all those standardized tests
okay,
to be
well, I
labeled as
guess
compostable or whatever.
yeah. So that brings me to I have this question, yeah, and probably people do too. So what about if you make a plastic container, and obviously it sounds
Yep.
like it would probably be food safe material. Would that in any
Yes.
way contribute to degradation though? Like if it was a salty water product, but you'd have to have the right
No.
bacteria and the right environment, right?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
you need significant bacteria. So even something like soda, it's not going to break down in there. The one thing is a strong acid or strong base could cause degradation. So I would not use this as packaging for your bleach bottle, for instance. If it's dilute, it would be okay.
Uh-huh.
And in terms of everyday life, like if you have a garment made out of it, as long as you properly launder your garment, it's going to be fine. But
Uh-huh.
if you make it into a rugby shirt or a soccer shirt, you roll around in the mud and you put that muddy shirt in a plastic bag in the trunk of your car where it's warm and you leave it there for many weeks without washing it, it could start to break down in that environment.
Yeah, but it would probably have other problems that would be more significant.
Yes.
Okay. So it may not be the thing for putting like medical materials in. I suppose it could be for some, but.
Well, actually, there are medical applications. My company's not focused on this, but you can use the type of polymer we produce for stents or for scaffolding after hip or shoulder surgery.
Well, those are nice and
because
without bacteria.
Yeah.
Those would be fine.
Well, it's actually biocompatible. So there are medical applications.
Well, I would think so. Well, it makes you think
on.
about stuff that's sitting, I think about that because I'm a doctor. And so things that are sitting in plastics for a while, you wonder how much plastic actually gets into the materials. So it's a concern.
Yeah. And there's a lot of single-use items, like we've looked a little bit at surgery rooms and things like that, where there's a lot of material disposed of.
Oh, sure. All the drapes.
Yeah.
Just think
exactly.
Of that.
Yeah.
That's
all sorts of things, bedpans, just everything.
Oh, yeah. A whole lot of stuff like that. It is single use and is a significant contributor to the plastic pollution problem. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Well, I think this is fascinating, which is why I asked you to come and talk about it. So how in the world did you ever get to decide to do this? I suppose, have you always been interested in science and inventing and things like that? Where did this all come from?
Yeah. So, I've been passionate about plastics, and actually I became interested in recycling at a very young age, actually in elementary school when I was like 7 or 8 years old. But the work that I do now is actually related to my Ph.D. research. So I have a Ph.D. in engineering, and we were looking at new building materials. So the background motivation for this work originated in the construction sector, where there's just very large volumes of materials that are often not. They're designed for safety and strength. They're not used with the environment in mind.
Right.
So we were looking at materials like things for disaster housing or concrete framework, things that are only used generally once or maybe a few times and then discarded, and generally made out of timber, out of wood. We were looking for something more rapidly renewable that could also be faster to, sort of close the loop in terms of biodegradation. Mm-hmm. So we became really interested in biocomposites, which is when you have natural fibers and a natural plastic and you smush them together to make like a plywood substitute.
Right.
That's what
we all
PhD
have that on our decks, I think, right?
Yes,
No.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are composites, and we were trying to make biocomposites. So from natural fibers and natural-based plastics, we looked at soybean oil ones, cellulose acetate-based ones. We became very interested in this class of polymers. It's a family of polymers called PHAs, polyhydroxyalkanoids. Generally derived, they're made naturally by most living things. So actually humans even make small amounts of PHAs. They're made by bacteria. The way they've been industrialized historically is by feeding bacteria sugar, which the properties of these polymers are great, but the cost point by using sugar as a feedstock and also potential sort of unintended consequences of using sugar from plants, from agriculture to make materials ends up with something expensive and also an environmental footprint that might not be superior. So we were doing research, and one of my co-advisors actually said, he's an expert, Craig Criddle at Stanford University, he's an expert in methane utilizing organisms. He said, this pathway should be naturally occurring in bacteria that eat methane. Instead of feeding bacteria sugar, could you feed them methane and make PHA? And my colleague at Mango Materials and co-founder, Alison Pija, her PhD actually focused just on that, going methane to PHA. So yes, it's possible. The foundational work was done as part of our PhD research. And after I graduated, my main PhD advisor had said, you're a technical person, focus on technology, leave business to business people. So I went and consulted for a bit. And during this time, I saw lots of other people starting companies. And little did I know, I was like, if these other people can start companies, why can't I?
So well, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Now I didn't realize what I was getting myself into. But So that was sort of the motivation behind incorporating mango materials, was the commercialization of this work. We've iterated and expanded and advanced significantly since that time, but that's what got me into this, which I would have never thought. I actually was an accidental PhD student. I just went to get my master's initially because then I'd get paid more as a civil engineer if I had a master's, and ended up staying to work on it to do environmentally friendly building material research.
So you got intrigued by the subject and had to pursue it all the way.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, that's a very good motivation for more education, just because it's fun to learn. That's sort of my philosophy in life in general. So were you always going to be an engineer, or was this something,
no.
Where do your family are engineers?
Yeah, well, so actually, and neither of my parents were engineers, but my paternal grandfather was a mathematician at UC Berkeley. And that's sort of the Morse side of the family. And actually, his father, my great-grandfather, was an inventor who had a company making chains. It's called Morse Chain in Ithaca, New York. And I'm related to Samuel Morse, who started Morse code.
Oh, my husband wanted to know that, because I live on a street called Morse Avenue.
Oh, really?
Right.
Yeah. So,
and my husband said, okay, what's her relationship to Morse?
Yeah, so I'm actually related to his brother, or his father, not a direct descendant from him. That was part of my narrative growing up is, when I was in third grade and had to do a book report on an inventor, I chose Samuel Morse. The funny thing is, my Morse side of the family is a little eccentric, and my mom's no longer alive, but one of her big fears was that I was going to end up like an eccentric Morse. Even when I was doing the reports on Samuel Morse, my mom would be like, he was a brilliant guy and very creative in a lot of ways, but he may have taken great care of his family and been respectful in certain other ways. And there's nothing more important in life than that. So try and be a normal person. And then I actually did my undergrad at Cornell University. And I thought I wanted to be a math major because, first of all, I thought engineering was like dorky guys did. I had no exposure to engineering really K through 12. And so, but I loved math and I loved science. So I thought I'd be a math major. And that lasted, I think, 2 days in undergrad. And I went and talked to my advisor at Cornell and I said, this is like really theoretical. And we had a conversation of what I was interested in. And he said, I think you want to be an engineer. So he gave me a booklet on the different types of engineering majors. And I read the one on civil engineering. And it was at the beginning of the year. So there was a intro to civil. I saw civil engineering. And I was like, yes, that's me. And there was a seminar on the civil engineering major. And I went to that and I was like, done. I love this. This is what I want to do. And but the funny thing is a lot of people at Cornell, like their parents were like, oh, you should be an engineer. Then you get a good job. My parents, especially my mom, were like very concerned. My mom's like, you're going to be boring. Like, are you sure you want to be an engineer? I was in that College of Arts and Sciences. I ended up transferring to engineering, but she's like, maybe take some more liberal arts classes. It's important to be well-rounded. Oh, yeah.
Well, it is important, but yeah, she was very, your mom was really concerned that you turned out to be very normal.
Yeah, she was concerned from the time I was an infant. I mean, I have kids now, and my mom would take me to all these play groups. She's like, you have to be able to talk to other people. Oh, my. Looking back on it now, sometimes I wonder what she would think, how things have turned out for me now. But
well, I think very well. I mean, obviously we need great minds going into business and being creative. I think that's not a bad niche to be in. And it doesn't sound so terribly eccentric to me. But now I'm an artist and I have very liberal theories about what is eccentric and not.
And Samuel Morse was an artist as well, actually.
But combine them both.
I try to pretend I'm normal, but you don't have to go too deep to realize I might beat to my own drum.
But I think this is very interesting. And so a lot of this is still in research and development, your product, or has it found any commercial uses yet? Or
so when we started off, we were very research focused. And over the past couple of years, we've slowly been transitioning out of that. So we are, at this point, we're still optimization in some research, but we're significantly more development. So we're now focused on working with the end partner brands. We do have revenue coming in from them, but we're not selling it at $2 or $3 per pound and it's going into something you can buy on the market. We're not there yet. We're at promotional proof of concept, working through the value chain, making sure the properties are there, and in partnership with a couple of brands. So yeah, transitioning out of R&D and into application development.
Yeah, well, just the whole idea of intriguing of using it for like things like decking material and disposable medical stuff or even kids' toys. Those sound like real good kind of applications for this kind of a product.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work on the applications. And at this point, we're pretty focused on the fiber work and some of the injection molding work, which is packaging or potentially toys. But we're mainly focused actually on caps right now. So we become more and more focused over time.
Sure. I mean, it's just fascinating. And then where do people find you if they're trying to locate you and get more information? Where would they look?
Yeah. So Mango Materials has a fairly active Facebook page. So you can follow us at Mango Materials. We also have a company, LinkedIn. We have Twitter at Mango Materials. We have Instagram. I am active on Twitter. It's Molly Morse, MOLMORSE. And I am pretty active on Instagram as well, Molly C. Morse. And yeah, we have a website. We're in the process of updating it, but it's www.mangomaterials.com. Mango like the fruit.
Like the fruit. Does that have any story behind it?
Yeah, we have nothing to do with mangoes. But when we were starting the company, we wanted something that sounded clean and yummy and safe and fresh. And you can make this into children's toys. You know, your children's toys made out of some very technical chemical sounding name or mango materials. So we wanted a fruit or a tree name. And mangoes are my favorite fruit. And actually at this point it is a little confusing because since we're going into the fiber sector, there's other companies that use pineapple waste or apple waste or orange waste, and they have names that apple fiber, orange fiber. We have nothing to do with mango the fruit other than mangoes are delicious. So we might have a name for our fiber that'll be something else. But yeah, that's how we came up with Mango Materials.
Oh, well, there is a story behind it, so that's good and a good one. And I suppose an M word for somebody named Molly Morse would follow too.
Yes. My husband always jokes about that. He's like, you just like the M alliteration. It's just a coincidence, I promise.
Oh, really? Okay. We'll believe that. So this is science, but it's very creative. And I was wondering if you had some general thoughts about creativity for my listener.
Yeah, I mean, so I'd actually go back to some things we didn't talk about as much, but I do have two children, one who's in elementary school. And yes, I'm an engineer, in a lot of ways, a very classically trained engineer. I went to a very traditional engineering school for undergrad. I worked in civil engineering and for a couple different firms over the years. But I think if we look at K through 12 education and how we encourage our children to solve problems and what they're exposed to, I think that's actually something that really can't be undervalued. At least in my world, we don't really talk a lot about. It was actually an activist, like an environmental activist, that came to my elementary school and got me excited about recycling. And I think these sort of key moments that children can have can stick with them for a really long period of time. Something myself and one of my other colleagues she was giving a TED talk, and she was talking about how amazing all the other people were that were giving TED talks with her. And some of them did things promoting mental health or human rights. And we went back and comparing that to plastics in the environment, how do you balance those two sort of issues, and are they on equal footing? And these challenges need lots of solutions. And so it's sort of a roundabout way of saying that I think fostering the creativity from a very young age and encouraging it, I think it's just of the utmost importance. I mean, isn't there some saying about a creative individual is a child that survived or a child that never grew up?
I'll have to look that quote up. Yeah, well, I think Einstein said something about keeping that wonder of childhood can lead to things. I'll look up that direct quote. But I think that's very important. And maybe, one of the things you mentioned earlier was how you hadn't really thought about engineering as a child because you thought it was some dorky guy thing.
I laugh about it now when we see all this STEM outreach and women and girls in tech and all these things. And
right.
That was not part of my personal narrative at all. Although I didn't have the traditional, I think they've done research on a lot of women engineers and scientists. I never had one of those experiences in middle school or high school where I felt inferior to the guys, or I felt like math and science was a guy thing. I never personally felt that.
Obviously, you were going to pursue math.
When I got to Cornell, I was like, man, what happened? Where are all the girls? Where are all the ladies?
You're right. I think this is an important development that's happened, is all the STEM stuff in school and pointing young women in that direction is important. We need too many new ideas and good ideas, especially with things happening, and we need to encourage that. So I think very good point. Thanks for making that. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and it was good to see you again recently at the...
Yes, likewise. Verge in Oakland. Yeah.
Verge in Oakland. That was really fun. And I saw there was a prototype of some fabric and a lid, I believe I saw there. So that's really cool. Yeah. It was fun to look at and see. And I have enjoyed this conversation enormously. And thank you very much for being our guest today. Thank you for listening. I'm delighted that Molly found time to inform us about the surprisingly fascinating world of plastic innovation. I saw a sample of the bottle caps and the fabric possibilities at her GreenBiz booth, and I'm excited about the future of this innovation. Just a reminder that you can find Molly at mangomaterials.com. While online, please visit and join our Creative Approach Facebook page. Your questions and feedback on the show are welcome on our Facebook group page, so do join that page as well. We love feedback, and audio feedback can be sent on the podcast website. While at the website, www.acreativeapproachpodcast.com, do sign up for our email list. Just a reminder to become a subscriber to a Creative Approach podcast on your favorite podcast platform, if you've not done so already. The podcast is available on most, including Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. And coming mid-December, we are excited that you will find a Creative Approach podcast on Pandora. If you'd like to support the show, even with $1 a month, your generosity would be most welcome. You can do that by going to the Patreon tab on the website. Please join me at a Creative Approach podcast in future conversations where I hope you will find inspiration to make things, tell your story, and explore a creative approach to life.